Welcome to our new course on usability engineering in medical devices. We have redone the entire course, and I think we actually came up with a better course than last time. Famous last words, but I think it's actually pretty cool. Firstly, we're using a better software to document usability stuff. We're using Formwork, our eQMS software. And secondly, we actually redid the content so that it's less boring and that you are less likely to fall asleep. So I have high hopes for this new course, and I hope you do too. So what is usability engineering actually about? I think in one sentence, it's fulfilling this standard, the IEC 62366. And if you haven't yet, I encourage you to read it. I'm quite sure you will fall asleep while doing so. But unfortunately, the biggest hack with medical device compliance is reading the standards yourself and actually doing stuff yourself and not paying expensive consultants like me to do stuff for you that's very inefficient and very expensive. And you'll simply be hardwired to these consultants who you have to pay every time you need to make a change. That doesn't make any sense. So as a quick primer, yes, this is Formwork, our software. It's great, blah, blah, blah. But actually, what I wanted to show you is this standard. So this is the standard, the IEC 62366. And as you can see on the shady official website, it costs 320 Swiss francs, which is completely crazy for a PDF. So this is, of course, completely crazy. And an auditor rightly called this the standards mafia. So the hack for this, if you didn't know about that, was to go to this friendly Estonian website, evs.ee, and buy the Estonian version of the standard, which you can get for 20 euros. Whoa, this is even free. But I don't think it's the right one. So you kind of like, good luck finding the right one here. But I think this is the right one. So yeah, get this. And I recorded a separate video how to download stuff on the Estonian site a while ago. So if I don't forget, I will link that below and you can take a look at that. There are a few gotchas which you need to kind of like avoid. Like you need to buy a license for at least 2 users. You need to get the PDF, all that stuff. But it's doable, and 20 euros for a PDF is still crazy, but it's not completely bonkers crazy like 300 plus Swiss francs. So get the standard, that's cool. Okay, so if you're still with me, now let's actually get into what you need to do to fulfill the requirements of this standard. And as in past videos, I won't go through the entire standard because that will be boring. You can read it yourself. Instead, I'll show you what you have to do in practice to fulfill the requirements of the standard. And in one sentence, actually, the usability standard is really simple, and it actually just doesn't have that many requirements. The biggest one is doing your summative usability evaluation. And all the other things, in very simplified terms, are very optional, and auditors will probably disagree with me, but that's what the reality is. So what does this mean for you? The first task you have to do is actually you have to document your hazard-related use scenarios. And what does that mean? In one of the past videos in risk management, we already did this, but I'll just recap super briefly what we documented so far and then see how usability stuff fits into the picture. All right, so we're in Formwork here, best eQMS software on the planet, according to my personal opinion. And we've been documenting in prior courses. So I recorded the course on software development according to the 62304 and risk management based on the 14971. And in the process of recording these videos, we started documenting this depression app, which is like a smartphone app. It doesn't exist, a smartphone app which is meant to treat people's depression if they use it. So patients use it directly. And among other things, we created some software requirements. So we kind of like said like, hey, okay, from time to time, it shows users a notification to ask them how they're doing. It authenticates users, so it takes user email and password. We added some software tests here. And most importantly, we did a risk analysis. And I won't go into too much detail here, but for example, you have different hazards where it says like, hey, if the user is exposed to the wrong medical text in the app, then something could be going wrong because, well, you don't want to show people suffering from depression. You don't want to show them medically wrong stuff like, hey, your depression is all your fault. Also, that's probably not a good medical approach. So you think about all these hazards and then you analyze them in your risk table, and it looks very fancy. And then in the end, hopefully you introduce something called risk controls so that things become acceptable, but I won't go into more detail there. So that's what we did in the past, and we did it pretty well, in my opinion. Now, the question is like, what's the missing piece for usability engineering? And the biggest thing, which we also hinted upon in the risk management videos, was documenting something called hazard-related use scenarios. Now, those are use scenarios in your app or in your software or in your hardware medical device, which are related to hazards, and you have to test them. So firstly, what are those and how do you document them? And I think that's super easy because in my opinion, it's easier in our software than in Google Docs. I did this in Google Docs for a couple of years as a consultant, and it was more painful. So if you go to user needs here in Formwork, you can see we've defined one user need of the patient. So you define different stakeholders here. You say like, okay, I have different stakeholders. We only define the patient, and for each stakeholder, you should probably define at least one user need. And we define this user need. Okay, the patient wants to get treatment for depression. If you go to edit, we can actually take a look at this, and we can see like, yes, okay, this is the patient, is the stakeholder, get treatment for depression, and then we could go into more detail what sort of treatment the patient actually expects from this app. And actually, let's use the fancy Formwork AI feature to just draft that for us, because that's kind of like a task where AI is pretty good. And that actually sounds pretty good. So we got that. Awesome. Formwork is cool. Now, the big thing here is, okay, optionally, a user need can be related to a hazard. And this is the big thing for usability documentation. So yes, you need to document all your user needs, but the user needs which are related to at least one hazard, those are the most important ones, because technically, according to the standard, you have to test those, and we'll get into what testing those means in one of the later videos. So if I would kind of like move forward with this, and I could define another user need, and like as a patient, let's say here, patient, I want to just contact customer support. And now you might kind of like already know that maybe this might not be related to hazards, because it's like not as super critical as getting like treatment for your depression, which makes sense. So we just go ahead and save it, and that's cool. So now we already learned like one thing, and I think the most important thing we learned is like, okay, some user needs are related to hazards, others are not. And if you are kind of like super minimalistic, and this is actually, even for my minimalistic taste, this is quite minimalistic, is you would only later test those user needs which are related to hazards, and you would not test the others. So we wouldn't test like the contact customer support user need here, but we would test the get treatment for depression user need here, because it's related to a hazard. But again, actually, even though I'm a huge minimalist, I was not that minimalistic in my consulting project. So I would, even if you have a user need which is still kind of like core to the product, even though it's not related to hazards, I would personally still test it in your user testing later. So for example, like, and to be fair, like contact customer support, that might actually be like, maybe we actually don't want to test that. Maybe it's just like a small bit, depending on like how often you expect your users to contact customer support. But let's create another one which is not hazard related, but which is still a big one, which we might want to test later. So you could say, okay, as a patient, I want to like create an account, log in, and start first depression course. Okay. Okay, we could argue for the sake of this example that this might not be related to a hazard, but it still sounds like a very, very core feature of your app, because it's literally kind of like the flow of a user using your app for the first time, creating an account, logging in, and starting like the first course. And like, it might be really weird, in my opinion, just as a software development company, it might be very weird to just like not test this and just like say, okay, this is the super core thing of our software, but we're too lazy to test it. So personally, I would, for example, test this. Okay. So we've defined these user needs. We've got one user need which is related to a hazard. We've got two other user needs which aren't, and some of them we want to test. And this is essentially the first task, which might sound super simple, but it's actually not, is define all your user needs and then kind of like analyze them for which of them are related to at least one hazard. And you might have to go back to the videos on risk management, where we kind of like looked at what hazards were, but you could also just wing it. And maybe as a quick side note, the most important point here is don't go crazy. So I think the biggest way in which companies fail at this task is they just define too many entries. And what I usually see in these I call them over-engineering companies, is like in software requirements, they would go ahead and define like 100 software requirements. And that's crazy because like you can't cache those in your head anymore. So now you don't know if you write a new one, requirement 101, you don't know if you've already written something similar also in the past. So like in these lists, I would personally aim for 20 software requirements or less, and user needs maybe 10 or less, or even less. I've seen a product with 1 user need, so you can keep it very minimalistic. So try that too. Try to like document your entire product in as few user needs as possible, which still kind of like describe the core features and especially the features related to hazards. And features is actually, again, not the super correct word, because features is probably what you define in your software requirements. And instead, user needs is more like, you could call it like user stories or like overarching, I guess, like hyper features or whatever. So that's your task. Get the user needs done. And then we'll talk in the next video what we do with those for our usability engineering compliance. Awesome, cool. See you there. And I hope you'll join me on our free usability engineering course.